Hello and welcome back to the Twitch stream. So this is, I think, the third episode of the live streaming that I'm doing on Twitch as part of the Polyglot Developer kind of educational content. So if you missed out on previous streams, I did one where I demonstrated how I edit videos prior to going on YouTube. And then it looks like Crutchcorn's already in the chat, but I also did a video with Corbin Crutchley a few days ago, and he demonstrated how to develop React applications, and it was a long and really interesting stream. So this time around, this is one of those kind of non-technical episodes. This is more of an operations perspective when it comes to what I do to kind of keep the Polyglot Developer Network running. So this is going to be around how I edit podcasts. So how I record them, how I edit them, kind of what goes into them. So that way you get an idea of the kind of work that I put into it. And then maybe if you wanted to start your own podcast, you have some ideas as well. So this is live. I'll type in the chat here. You can see that I am engaging. So if you have any questions, please stop me. This is going to be a fairly long stream, probably at least 30 minutes, because I think that's how long the episode is that I recorded that I'm going to edit. So it may get a little boring at some point in time, but it's the real, like, kind of unedited version of what I do. So this is it's meant to be educational. As far as kind of housekeeping goes, in case you're catching this on demand, which it will be at the end on YouTube, you can go ahead and follow the YouTube channel. So this is also the Twitch stream that we're on right now, in case you are catching it on demand. But let's just jump right into the core kind of material. I'm making it up as I go, so there could be errors. So you'll notice that on my screen here, I have a tool called Zencastr open. So this is actually what I've been using to record the podcasts. It wasn't what I started with. I actually started with Skype, but it kind of got out of hand when it came to updates. The plugins that I was using were breaking quite a bit. It may be resolved now, but I've kind of moved away from it. Instead, Zencastr is a kind of freemium service. I'm using it for the free plan. So it's been working out for me. But basically what happens is you create an episode on Zencastr and you invite guests into that episode. So the free plan, I think you're allowed to have 3 guests. But basically what happens, and if I click on an episode here, I'll just click on an old one that I recorded. But in this example, what happens is you can start a call with everyone on this particular recording. They don't need to install any kind of software. This is, as far as I know, I think it's like WebRTC or something like that. It saves a local copy of the recording to each person's computer for maximum quality. And then at the end of the stream, when you hang up, it uploads it all into Zencastr, and then you can download it on a track-by-track basis. So it's pretty neat. It's, like I said, I use the free version. They have a paid version if you want higher quality recordings, or I think more guests. I think they offer other things as well. I don't get any kind of affiliate credit for this. This is just a tool that I like using. So I won't actually record an episode with Zencastr. I've already got one recorded. There isn't a whole lot to it, so don't think I'm skipping out on anything. We're going to go into the bulk of what I am up to. So actually, let me exit out of this in case it's kind of hogging my valuable computer resources here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up GarageBand. So unfortunately, this is a Mac product. There's other options when it comes to Windows, but this is what I'm using for Mac for editing the podcast. It comes with, I think, all Macs, so it's free. Just let me type in the chat. Zencastr is what I was using for recording. And then for editing, I am using GarageBand. And this is a new stream. I mean, there's not a whole lot of people watching, I'm sure, right now. So the chat probably won't be too engaging right now. But if you are on the chat, please say something. Announce yourself. Definitely want to know that you're there. All right. So the first step. So this is a new project with GarageBand. I haven't changed anything. I've just opened up GarageBand, and this is kind of where I landed. What I do is I add a few tracks. I'm starting with 1 by default. I like to edit the settings a little bit. I watched a YouTube video at some point in time on kind of optimizing for the best sounding audio. So I've looked at the equalizer settings. Basically what this YouTube video said, because I'm myself not an audio expert, is if you want to kind of make it so that way it's more normalized, so that way you don't have super high volumes and super low volumes, you can change the equalizer a bit, boost the low just a little bit, and decrease the high just a little bit. So that's all I use when it comes to changing my GarageBand settings. I know that there's plenty of other settings that I could choose to edit as well, but for the most part, what you're seeing here is what I use when it comes to recording, or more so editing a podcast. Now, to save me from having to make that change every single time, what I could do is I could save this setup as kind of a patch. So I'm going to call it podcast, and I'm going to save it. So it creates a user patches right here, and now podcast is there. So every time I add a new track, and I'll just go ahead and add one. This will be an audio microphone. I will click it. I will click user patches, and I will click podcast. So it adopts the settings that I had set up. Have I used Audacity before? I used to use Audacity back a long time ago when I was using Linux and Windows. Nothing wrong with it. I think for the most part it'll accomplish the same. I actually sometimes use Audacity to calibrate my microphone. So you'll notice that I have this volume right here. When it comes to recording, generally you don't want to be in the red. So if I get real close and I start shouting, it'll start turning red. Audacity offers a little bit more power when it comes to adjustments like that. If I wanted to, I could use Logic Pro X on Mac, which would accomplish it as well, but it's not free. So nothing against Audacity. This is just, I figured, why not? It's an Apple product. It's there for me. I'm not going to fight it. I don't need anything extra. So that's my reasoning. So actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add one more track, and you'll see why. So I'll just add one more. This will also be podcast. So I have 3. So if I look at my previous recording, I have 2 tracks, one for me and one for my guest, but I have 3 here. I actually have a separate track because I like to add kind of an intro and outro. So you can call them bookends. I call it narration, whatever you can think up as far as a naming convention for this. But I record that, and then I kind of just pop the 2 tracks in between. And no problem, Crutchcorn. Yeah, I think you're on a Windows more lately. If you are good at Audacity, more power to you. It's a great open source tool, or at least I think it's open source still. I've always wanted to kind of get Logic Pro X. I know that I think it's $200. I probably don't need it, but I kind of want it. So I've always been curious on how that would change my podcasting or just audio creation in general. And in case for curiosity's sakes, the microphone that I'm on now is the microphone I use to record the podcasts. So this is an AT2020 microphone. So AT2020. I actually have 2 of them. So this is an AT2020 USB microphone. At the computer behind me, I have an AT2020 XLR microphone. If you do plan on getting these microphones, note that the XLR one, which is cheaper, does require a preamp. So you can't get the standard one without a preamp and a USB converter. So if you wanted something simple, the one that I'm on now is a USB version of that. You can get it on Amazon. It's pretty easy to come by. All right, so I have my tracks here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to record an intro. This is going to be episode number 36. It's going to be on the topic of machine learning. I recorded it a few weeks ago with a guest, and you're basically going to see me edit it. So let's give it a shot. So what I'll do is I'll click record. I'll actually disable this stuff. I hate that. I hate the metronome and the counting. It's basically, it clicks for me. It's probably more useful when it comes to actually recording instruments. But it drives me nuts when I'm editing. So this is episode number 36 of the Polyglot Developer Podcast, and I'm your host, Nick Raboy. So you'll see that I just recorded this clip if I wanted to, and I think, or at least I'm hoping, that you can hear my speaker output, but I'm going to play it back. This is episode number 36 of the Polyglot Developer Podcast, and I'm your host, Nick Raboy. So that's what I recorded. Basically, I'll just record just a little bit more to kind of get the show started, and then we'll keep editing. I'll show you. I'll talk about the commands I use to edit, but I'll line this up fairly close. I can always strip it together there. Thanks for confirming, CrutchCorn, that you can hear the playback. Hopefully it's not too loud. I'm looking at my OBS, Open Broadcast Studio. I never got into the red for the speakers. Let me lower my microphone volume just a little bit because it looks like I am getting into the red for my microphone. Is that better on my microphone audio? Maybe I can get a confirmation. Seems good to you. All right, perfect. All right, thanks for being interactive. All right, so let's go ahead and add a little bit more. So this is a machine learning episode. I am with this episode. I believe I was recording with Upker Litter from IBM. So let me record it. I could always change it if I need to. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. In this episode, I'm with Upker Litter from IBM, and we're going to be talking about machine learning and how to do it when it comes to development, data science, AI, just various relevant topics when it comes to the job market nowadays. So you'll see that I'm recording in kind of short bursts. I can never maintain a clarity of mind enough to do a perfect recording in one go, which is fine. Little chunks is absolutely fine, but let's go ahead and play it back. Notice that it is a little high right here. What I could do is I could lower the record level just a bit to kind of smooth that out. But let's just go ahead and see how it sounds. Boy. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. In this episode, I'm with Upker Litter from IBM, and we're going to be talking about machine learning and how to do it when it comes to development, data science, AI, just various relevant topics when it comes to the job market nowadays. So I have a little bit of silence at the end of this. I could leave it, or what I could do is I can use the command plus T, and then what it does is it just sliced it for me there. So if I click it and I hit the delete, it just deletes that excess. And that's more or less the commands that I'm going to be using throughout this. So I'm just going to be chopping up the tracks and deleting any kind of silence, any kind of coughing, sneezing, maybe the doorbell rings, just to kind of clean up the podcast episode. All right, so let's give it a shot. Let's maybe record just a little bit more. Let's see what else. What should I add here? I'm trying to think here. I'm drawing a blank on what I should add. Maybe I promote the website. If you're looking to content. That doesn't make any sense. Let me delete it. If you're looking for content related to this particular episode, head over to the Polyglot Developer blog. So if you go to thepolyglotdeveloper.com, you can read up on a lot of great tutorials. You can get links to YouTube videos that I've recorded, other podcast episodes, just all around good stuff when it comes to learning about different technologies. You'll see that I'm just throwing stuff in there, trying to make it a little interesting. I know that it's a development podcast, so it's probably not the most interesting topic in the world. It is for probably a lot of people, but compared to other podcasts out there, you get where I'm going, hopefully. So let's just read this one more time, and then I'll show you how to import the actual core content. If you're looking for content related to this particular episode, head over to the Polyglot Developer blog. So if you go to thepolyglotdeveloper.com, you can read up on a lot of great tutorials. You can get links to YouTube videos that I've recorded, other podcast episodes, just all around good stuff when it comes to learning about different technologies. So I'll stop it. Then I'll kind of do what I do in every episode. After I trim it here, I'll say, and I'll say something like, enjoy the show. Something simple, right? Out different technologies. Enjoy the show. So I'll cut it. Let's go ahead and save it. Let's go ahead and call it Polyglot Podcast. I'll save it. Now I'll go ahead and open up the Finder. Let's go ahead and drag these two tracks in. Like I said, it's about 30 minutes. It's going to be, I'll be chatting a little bit throughout, but it's just going to be the editing process. So I've added these two. And I could always go back and change the main track at any time. Let's clear the silence away. So I'm going to highlight both tracks that I want to edit. I'm using this, I don't know the true name of it. I call it the tracker, but it's probably got a real name. This is where the cut is going to happen. So just split them, and I'm going to delete the first two. And I'm going to move this over just a little bit to get rid of some silence. So that's going to lead into it. And it might be loud, so just brace yourself for a second. Technologies. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, I'm with Upkar Litter from IBM, and so it's actually, this track is a lot less in volume. So let's see what the guest track is, and we can make adjustments from there. I'm with Upkar Litter from IBM, and we're going to be talking about machine learning in this particular podcast episode. But before we get into the bulk of the episode, I want to give Upkar a chance to introduce himself. So how you doing, Upkar?
Hi, Nick. I'm very happy to be here.
So his volume is more or less close to mine. So this narration track is a little loud. Let's go ahead and lower the volume just a bit. Maybe I can actually get away with maybe making it like -6. So I've lowered this track, and hopefully it now matches a little better to the other. So let's give it a shot. Once we calibrate it, it'll be smooth sailing from there. Stuff when it comes to learning about different technologies. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, I'm with Upkar Litter. So for anyone who's watching, what do you think? Does it sound kind of close in volume level between the two? I think it does. I'll play it one more time just in case. Recorded other podcast episodes, just all around good stuff when it comes to learning about different technologies. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, I'm with Upkar Litter from IBM, and we're going to be talking about machine learning in this particular podcast episode. But before we get into the bulk of the episode, I want to give Upkar a chance to introduce himself. So how you doing, Upkar?
Hi, Nick. I'm very happy to be here today. And
so not bad. So what I'm going to do now, so that way it's for my own kind of personal knowledge here, I'm going to rename these tracks. So I know this is the Nick Raboy track, and this one is the Upkar Litter track. So just for my own knowledge.
hello, everybody who's listening. I work with IBM. I'm a developer advocate, and I focus on machine learning and artificial intelligence solutions that we have to offer, and also a lot of open source solutions.
So how did you get into the kind of realm of? So I cut them off. So this is fixable. And I don't know if I cut them off or maybe these two tracks are not in sync. Regardless, it's fine. So let's go ahead and see if I can fix that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my tracker here. I'm only going to highlight this one track where it's kind of me cutting them off. And let's see what we can do.
Offer, and also a lot of open source solutions.
So how did you get into the kind of realm of machine? Actually, I think instead of me moving it around, let me undo. It sounds like he was done actually right here. So let's check it out. Yeah, so I could probably remove his part. So I am going to cut his, and I am going to take that right there. I'm going to highlight this clip now, and I'm going to hit delete. So let's see what happens. And again, when I make the cuts, I'm actually using a shortcut on my keyboard. The shortcut is the Command key plus T.
A lot of open source solutions.
So how did you get into the kind of realm of machine learning? What kind of interested you in this subject material?
For me, it was, I before picking up the developer advocacy role, I was working with a lot of clients through IBM, and machine learning and artificial intelligence. A lot of it was pure magic to me, and so I am, I'm that kind of person who wants to see what's behind the magic. And so while working on a couple of projects that involve predicting, I can't go into the details of the project, but it was essentially predicting if a high school student how they would do on a specific subject a couple of years down the road. And that was pure magic to me, and I wanted to understand that more. So I got together, reached out to the data science team, and basically started learning from there. And I got really interested after that in chatbots and the whole NLP side of machine learning and AI.
I'm sure that education type use case is huge, right? Being able to predict if somebody's going to do well, given the major that they chose, maybe, right?
Absolutely. Our use case.
So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit Upkar's volume. So I'm going to lower his just a bit. I think it's a little louder than my audio track. I really want to get them all close to being the same. Because if you play this back in your headphones or your car, I don't want you to get blasted every time somebody else talks. So I just lowered it just a little bit. It should be fine now. Let's check it out.
Given the major that they chose, maybe, right?
Absolutely. Our use case was based on a number of factors or attributes. For example,
it's actually, I think it's raining outside. I didn't know what the noise was outside.
Historical academic record of the student, their aptitude, even going into some information like how many classes have they missed, demographic information. All of those features were input into this model that would help teachers and help automate the process of based on the kids' learning style, offer them the material that would help them the most.
Awesome. Do you think that this, maybe it's a sensitive subject, but do you think this kind of material or this kind of practice would be good for admissions, like getting into universities? Like, hey, this student applied for such and such subject. Maybe they're not a good fit based on the material that this machine learning calculated, right?
Right, exactly. So I don't think it's a.
So I just paused it. I'll just talk a little bit so that way you're just not watching me stand here. The reason why I listen to the whole podcast over again is just like when I record the screencast for YouTube. I want to make sure that I didn't miss anything. Usually I record 30-minute episodes. Stuff happens. I said I recorded this episode a few weeks ago. I don't remember if there was any kind of mishaps. I didn't write them down. I don't know if the audio is in sync because Zencastr, every once in a while, the audio is just a little bit out of sync between the tracks. I want to make it as best of a kind of polished episode as I can. So that is why I listen to the track from start to finish for every podcast that I record.
I think it's a question of if or when. I think it already is happening. A lot of decisions that are made by universities in terms of admission or giving out student loans or sponsoring students actually, I think, already have inputs from machine learning models. And you're absolutely right in that it is a very sensitive topic, and it affects our lives in more ways than one. And so we have to be very cognizant of that fact and be careful when working with these models.
So I guess before we even go down this kind of rabbit hole on these different use cases, why don't we take a step back? And so when somebody's talking about just machine learning, when somebody brings that up, what does that mean?
That's a good question. So it means a lot of things to different folks. I understand that it's a very vague sort of term. But for me, essentially, it means having machines or computers uh, take some decision on our behalf, or at least have an input into our decision making. And a lot of times that may look like, for example, finding hidden patterns or not so obvious patterns in some sort of data set. Right? So you're learning from your data and then hopefully be able to generalize that enough to make predictions on unseen data. Um, Also, when folks talk about machine learning, that's my general sense of it. But then there are subcategories that folks talk about. For example, there are models that are built with supervised learning versus unsupervised learning, and we can go into details as well.
Yeah, I definitely want to. So when somebody's talking about machine learning, is that, I mean, I often hear, at least personally, I could be, and you can say, hey, this is totally silly. Are people talking about AI and data science in the same category? Or are
That
they totally different subjects?
well, there I wouldn't say.
All right, so I'm going to do some cleanup here. I mean, I could leave it. It's part of kind of the vibe of a real kind of interview, but it's not absolutely necessary. So I'm going to do two things here. So first of all, I'm gonna trim the silence. So I'm going to select both tracks. I'm going to cut there, and I'm going to cut right about there. So I'm going to delete the empty space there. I'm going to move it over. I'm going to move both of them over. And I am going to cut out what Upkar was saying there. And actually, I'm going to cut out a little bit more. Well, actually, let's cut right there. I gotta select both tracks there. All right, and because I don't want too much white space. Nobody likes to sit around with big pauses on their podcast. I know that there's a lot of podcast tools that will remove the silence, but just in case. So first of all, I am going to remove those. Move it over. Maybe give it a little bit of silence. And I'm going to remove Upkars. So let's give it a shot. Are people talking about AI and data science in the same category? Or are they totally different subjects?
Well, I wouldn't say they're totally different subjects. I think they're very much complementary. When you search these terms on the internet, the first picture usually that shows up is that Venn diagram with the artificial intelligence being the bigger circle, and then within that you have machine learning as one way possibly to achieve artificial intelligence. And then data science is a very crucial part of machine learning because everything starts with data. Without data, there essentially is no machine learning. So they are all related to each other. I wouldn't say they're completely separate. But yes, it is confusing to talk of these different roles and sort of subcategories of artificial intelligence.
So when we're talking today, then we're talking most strictly about just machine learning as a whole, then, right? Not over.
So you'll notice that my tracker was kind of moving. It wasn't moving the audio at the same time because I clicked outside. If I wanted to follow, I can just click on this catch playhead right here. This might actually be called a playhead. I'm not sure. But I can click it and then I can hit play.
Over AI, not over.
And you see how it moves at the same time now.
Even though that they're kind of loosely related, right?
Correct. It's very hard to talk about just one of these without including some aspect of the other. Yes, correct.
Sure. So let's talk about maybe we can go back down your personal story on how you got into machine learning. But say I'm learning development or programming, or I'm in a computer science program. How does one get into machine learning? Is this something that you specifically have to focus on in school, or something that you got to study very hard on to get into?
So that's a really good question. And I think it's also relevant to not just machine learning data science, but also computer science, right? So I know there have been debates on, whether you need a four-year degree program versus a boot camp versus learning on your own. And I think it really depends on your learning style. So first of all, I don't think a PhD is absolutely necessary to get into machine learning and data science. What is absolutely necessary is curiosity. So if you see something or see somebody using a model, and you are able to then go to maybe a research paper that talks about it, or maybe to the GitHub code repository and start playing around with that code, start asking the right questions. I think that's a good start and a great way to get into data science and machine learning. And to be frank with you, there are so many options online. Right now, we are very lucky to live in a world where we have options like the massive online courses and communities built around data science and AI, whether it be a YouTube channel or a Slack channel, where we can get all this information. So I think the biggest obstacle in learning, if you really wanted to learn data science and AI right now, is ourselves, and not taking that first step to to look at any one of these resources.
Did you happen to have any personal favorites when it came to these learning resources?
I like there are a couple of courses that I did like on Coursera. In fact, IBM has a couple of great specializations as well. The Stanford course is particularly well done, and it goes very deep into artificial intelligence and data science. But I also like there are a couple of weekly newsletters I follow. One is called Data Science Weekly. You can look it up online. And that essentially, newsletters for me are great because it's, with our day-to-day work and everything else, especially if you're a software engineer or a software developer and you're trying to get into AI, but that's not your full-time job. I feel something like that where information is pushed to me is really great, versus me going out and having to search for that information.
So and what was this, Data Science Weekly?
That is correct.
Perfect. I will...
All right, so there's a little bit of a gap. What I can do is, first of all, I did talk over them just slightly here. I can even it out a bit. So let's see if I can even it out a bit. So I will first cut right here. So I took out both. I used the Command T. Move my playhead or tracker or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to cut right here. I'm going to remove both. And actually what I might want to do is cut right here. Just that one track where I'm overlapping, and just move it over just slightly. Now, to get things kind of lined up correctly after, I'm going to fill the remaining gap here. And I could cut this. It's not going to, there's going to be a little bit of silence there. Let's see what we end up with.
Versus me going out and having to search for that information. So yeah.
And what was this, Data Science Weekly?
That is correct.
Perfect. I will make...
All right, so let's clean it up slightly more. I'm going to click on this track. I'm going to cut it. I'm going to remove that piece. And I'm going to continue to drag it over. So a little bit of silence there, but probably not enough to hurt us.
And what was this, Data Science Weekly?
That is correct.
Perfect. I will make sure that gets included in the notes when
not
we
too bad.
Publish this episode. So now I kind of want to kind of exercise your storytelling here. I want you to kind of take the listeners on a journey on what it takes to kind of get set up with machine learning. What's the process? What goes into it to kind of be successful? Where do you start? You probably start with the data, but walk us through it.
Right. Well, I would say even before data, you probably start with some sort of a problem or some sort of some sort of an itch you want to scratch, so to speak. So there is maybe working with IBM. Usually, it's a very enterprisey sort of problem we're looking at. A recent project that I did, we looked at our customer surveys and NPS scores that we get back from these customers. And so the problem was, well, we're getting all these scores back, and some of them are good, some of them are bad. Can we come up with a model that would help us?
I did want to stop it and point out something. So let me save it. Always be saving. Even though this is an Apple software, it could still crash. Something could still happen. You don't want to lose your work, especially when we're listening to long podcasts. But you'll notice that when I'm playing and this tracking bar right here is moving, you'll see a scroll bar at the bottom. The scroll bar, the end of the podcast is over here. So if we're currently over here, we've got quite a bit to go when it comes to editing this podcast. Sometimes when I'm editing my own podcast, it does feel like a grueling process, but it's what's necessary if you want to do a good job. But that'll give you some sense of idea on how much you have left to go. So let's go ahead and give it a try.
Convert detractors, so people who give us low NPS scores, to net promoters, people who give us high NPS scores. So that's a very concrete business problem that affects perhaps revenue or cost optimization or something like that. So in our case, it would hopefully lead to happier customers if we were able to come up with with the reasons as to why we have detractors that we do have. So I would say
on that real quick.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Now this is exciting stuff.
All right, so let's maybe remove this piece right here. And see what that sounds like.
We have detractors that we do have. So I would say even. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Now this is exciting stuff. So we're starting.
Maybe I remove this part too. Maybe I remove both. See what that sounds like.
Why we have detractors that we do have.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt. Now this is exciting stuff.
Sounds a little better.
So we're starting with a particular kind of goal that we want to accomplish. How do you even know if that goal is appropriate for a machine learning task versus something else?
So we've got a lot of silence here. Let's go ahead and clean this up. So Command T. Let's go ahead and remove it. There could be better ways. If somebody is watching this and you're a GarageBand expert and you think I could optimize my strategy, please let me know. Always open for tips.
Machine learning task versus something else.
That is a great question. So
let's remove this silence. We'll also remove the since we're able to catch it here. So let's go ahead and bring that in, see what it sounds like.
Task versus something else.
That is a great question. So
sorry, I'm putting you on the spot on a lot of things, right?
This is fine. This is absolutely great. I was trying to gather my thoughts so I can say what I want to say very concisely.
No worries.
All right, let's remove some more silence here. And I always do both, even though it's not necessary, because it helps me align them better. If I were to only cut the track that I wanted to fix, getting the audio in sync or keeping it in sync, it can become a nightmare. When possible, I try to do changes to all the tracks.
So the question is, how do you decide if a given problem has a machine learning related solution, or part of the solution could be machine learning related, right?
Yeah, because you don't want to put.
Let's remove the This is one of those circumstances where I won't cut both of them. So I'm not gonna move anything.
Part of the solution could be machine learning related, right?
Yeah, because you don't want to put 100 hours into thinking that it's a machine learning problem when it could have been solved with an hour of something else, right?
Yeah, and that happens a lot. A lot of times, as human beings, our intuition or something based on our experience, or the thing we call our gut feeling, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But what data gives us is the concrete evidence, and we can evaluate our solution based on data. So I would say, with machine learning, versus other sort of manual solution. First of all, if there is a lot of data, then I think it's kind of hard for us, and it's very time consuming and resource consuming to go through all of that data manually. So in our case, the data happened to be customer tickets, right? So support tickets, and there's thousands and thousands of support tickets. What clients do we focus on first? Which ones of those do we filter out so we don't spend a lot of time? A lot of these resource intensive tasks, absolutely, if you can put quote unquote machine learning or even automate some of that, then that is a good start versus doing something like that manually. Apart from that, humans are really good at generalizing stuff. So given a very small set of data, and based on my past experience, I'm able to do some predictions really quickly and very fast. But we are sort of not so good at finding hidden patterns in large amounts of data. So if I give you 10,000 different support tickets, it'll take us a lot of time to get to those patterns, and that's another part where machine learning can help very quickly. So I would say, given how easy it is nowadays to get started with machine learning, a lot of times, I'm sure we'll get into that. A lot of times, majority of your time is spent on gathering this data, this input data, versus actually creating your models and running and deploying your models, right?
Yeah. So we
have
a
remove
particular
that
problem we
silence.
want to solve.
So first I'll start with this because I'll remove that as well. So let's go ahead and start with that. We'll remove the gap. We'll drag this, and then I'll just do a solo cut right here and remove that. So
running and deploying your models, right? So
we have a particular problem we want to solve. We know that we have a massive amount of data that's probably not convenient, or we're not able to do this manually. What's next?
All right, so the next step in the pipeline usually is to somehow get this data in a format that you need. Even before that, just getting access to the data. So for example, I'll give you the example from that student or the education site we were trying to build. In that case, we were working with school districts across the country, and a lot of times data is stored in, I'm sure you've seen this too, data is stored in multiple databases, legacy databases, a lot of times, always, right? And a lot of times it's, the different tables sound similar, which one is, more up to date. You wouldn't believe how much time is spent just working with your domain level expert or working with the client to get to the right data. So that's, I feel, step number one after step number 0, which is problem identification, is getting to that data and creating some sort of process to enable automated gathering of that data. Because a lot of times these problems, it very soon turns into the automation becomes almost like a how do I say this? It becomes very necessary very quickly.
Sure.
So that would be step number.
Let's go ahead and cut this out.
It becomes very necessary very quickly. So that would be step number, the next step. Once you have that data, then there's always, you have to remember in all of these, a lot of these projects, you as a data scientist or a software engineer are not experts in that data or in that system. And so you're always working with somebody on the client side. So usually, it could be their data science team if they have one, or it could be their IT personnel who give you the right access to the data. So once you have that data, then you want to go and start exploring the data. And as I'm sure the audience would agree, it's hardly ever the case that the data is absolutely completely clean and in the format that you want it in.
Right? I don't think I've ever seen a case where it's been clean or in the format I've wanted it.
Unless it's a Kaggle competition where maybe somebody's already massaged that data beforehand.
Yeah.
But you're right. So give me one second. I'm opening something up which should have helped me.
All right, let's get rid of this gap. Let's see what we got here. Maybe I can clean it up better.
But you're right. So give me I'm sorry.
So let's see if I get what would happen if I just remove this. Let's check it out.
Yeah.
But you're right. Um, yeah. So in terms of
Perfect. I removed that part of the stream where he was looking something up on his computer. I could have left it in. It kind of, like I said, certain things can add to the vibe of the episode because it's interview, it's radio, keeps it more human. But I like to clean up wherever I can.
a clean versus noisy data, you can have a lot of times this data has been input by a human beforehand, right? So, or nowadays you get a lot of data with a lot of this data from your IoT devices or wearable devices or whatnot, depending on the problem. And so a lot of times there is blank data or there is an input error by the humans. And so the next step after you have access to all this data would be to explore this data, describe this data, verify the quality of this data, get a very intimate understanding of what you're dealing with. So once you're done with that, the next step is data preparation before you build your model, right? So
Got it.
So in terms of data preparation, think about perhaps normalizing your data. So an example of that would be, let's say I'm predicting house prices, and in this case, my input features into my model could be number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, and perhaps the square footage of the house. And what would happen in that case is your number of bathrooms and bedrooms maybe range from 2 to 5, perhaps, but your square footage would be maybe from a couple of hundred square feet to a couple of thousand square feet. And so the units are completely different on these input features, but your model doesn't care about that. So for the model to give equal weightage for a level playing field, so to speak, one thing you have to do is normalize your data. Another example of data preparation would be, these models work with numbers. And so if I have a categorical data input or an attribute, for example, if how close, or if the house is close to, let's say, a shopping mall, and my answer to that question is yes or no, or perhaps it's very close or close enough or not so close and far away, right? So it's categorical data that our model does not understand. And so there are ways to then encode these categories into numerical values, which the model can then understand and work with.
So then I have a question around this then before we go to the next step. So very numerical based. What about in the example where I'm running surveys or something and I'm allowing for free text? Can you use machine learning to try to come up with categories based on what people are using in free text? I'd assume this is the same thing on how voice assistants work, right? Or chatbots. You're generally not putting numbers in, right? You're putting in actual words.
Correct. So you're absolutely right. So there are other ways to deal with textual data, and there's a whole branch of natural language understanding that deals with natural language and text and speech data. So one way, I'll give you an example. With the NPS score model that we were building internally, what we decided to do was we said, okay, we have all these back and forth between the client and the support engineer, and one way to look at that would be to look at sentiment analysis or tone analysis between the client and the the support person. So that was one way to look at it. So to answer your question, then even if you're working with textual data, you still have to encode it. At the end of the day, or a lot of these machine learning models are dealing with math and vectors, right?
Sure.
And matrices. So eventually, you do have to come up with some sort of numerical data. An example being, let's say you want to see how closely two things are related, right? So in a chat application, for example, you have trained your chatbot to, if somebody asks about the weather, you have trained the chatbot to answer back if the user is asking, what is the weather like tomorrow? But you also want to answer back if the user says, is it going to rain tomorrow? Because they're similar questions. And so there's a way to figure out similarities between two pieces of text. And there are different kinds of distances that you can use to do that. So without going into details, yes, to answer your question, eventually everything gets converted into some sort of numbers.
Got it. All right, so then let's continue down this line of events. What comes after the conversion into some kind of number?
All right, so you've got your, you have your problem understanding or problem statement. You have a data acquisition. Then you have explored your data, have a good understanding, and then you do data preparation, in which case you're cleaning, normalizing, transforming data. After that, now you're at a point where you want to start building your model. In this case as well, as depending on what kind of problem you're looking at, so you might be looking at a regression problem where you're predicting a numerical value as a result, right? So the example being, how much is this house going to cost if I give you the number of bedrooms, bathrooms, and where it is located? Versus you may be looking at a classification problem where you're saying, is this a cat or a dog? That's one example. So based on what problem you're looking at or what category of machine learning algorithm you want to use, then you dive into specific models. Now there are tons and tons of models and or frameworks that you can use to create your model. But this phase, I call it the model development phase. So this is where you try a bunch of models. And again, based on your experience and your expertise, you might already know that some models work better with this kind of data or this kind of distribution of data. And so you go to those first. But eventually in this phase, what you want to do is you want to try, how many of our models, a dozen, half a dozen models. And then you want to score or evaluate these models. So this is my model development process where I am trying to figure out what model fits best to my category of problem, and then try a bunch of models, and then figure out which model is the best for this set of data.
Got it. That sounds good.
All right, let me remove this part. It doesn't really add any value to the episode. So if you're just tuning in, what I'm doing is I'm selecting both of the tracks, and I'm using Command T to slice at this playhead tracker, and then I'm going to move it right there, and I'm going to do it again. So that way I isolate these two clips and I can delete them, and I can move over the overall podcast episode. So we just removed some cruft that wasn't necessary.
Out which model is the best for this set of data. Okay, so once you do have your model, and again, model development is it's not simply just plugging in data into a model and then trying it out. You also have to think about configuration or hyperparameter optimization for each of these models. You have to think of feature generation, which is the task of generating new features based on existing features. So for example, maybe the number of house, number of bedrooms, or number of bathrooms by themselves don't add as much information to my final model as perhaps the product of number of bedrooms and number of bathrooms. So I'm sort of making that up, but that's the idea.
Yeah.
You're trying to figure out what combination of features would give me the most insight into my final target attribute. So that's part of this as well.
Now, because this is not a subject I deal with at all, really.
Let's go fix this a little bit.
So that's part of this as well. Into my final target attribute. So that's part of this as well.
Now, because this is not a subject I deal with at all, really. Are the models the training data, or is that something else? Because generally, I think with machine learning, I hear a lot of.
All right, let me clean this up a bit. So for one, we'll get rid of the silence. move this over, and we'll remove this part that Upkar was saying, so that way there's no overlap, and let's give it a shot. Are the models the training data, or is that something else? Because generally, I think with machine learning, I hear a lot of like training data or sample data. Is this the models, or is the model something else?
So model is something else. So when you do data preparation, so part of creating this model would be to, you probably heard this before, to split your data into testing data and training data. The reason being, if when you create your model, you want to test it later, and you don't want to test your model on the data you trained it with. That would be cheating.
Sure.
And so you keep a little bit of data aside, for evaluation purposes. So that's your data. And then your model is, how do I say this? Your model is sort of your compiled algorithm, set of steps or algorithm that you can then use to predict later.
Sure. And when you're testing your model, you said you've probably already provided it with some learning data. Is this a manual process to make sure that your model is doing what it should, to see if it's predicting accurately?
Sorry, you're saying, is it a manual process?
Yeah. So and then if I've got a poor understanding of this, just please correct me. So we have our model, we start providing it data to see if to let it do its predictions, right?
Correct.
Are we clear on that so far?
Yes.
So are we providing it more, I guess, data that we have like handpicked to make sure that it's predicting correctly before we let it loose in the wild? Or at what point do we establish trust in our model? I guess I'm after.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and you're right. So in the step before, in this step, we split our data into testing, into training and testing, and that generally you want to randomize that, because if you handpick your data so that the model performs well with the data you picked, then again that would be cheating. And I'm just using cheating as
no
funny way to say it, but the goal is you want your model to do well in the wild on data it has never seen.
Sure.
And so you're kind of trying to mimic that in this process. So you're saying, hey, I'm training you on this bunch of data. Now you have never seen test data. Go do predictions. I already know the answers for my test data. So then I can do some evaluations. And there are multiple ways depending on what algorithm or what kind of category of model you're looking at. For supervised learning, you can say, look at the accuracy, or maybe there's something called confusion matrix. I'm sure you've heard of the term. I'm not exactly sure why it's called confusion matrix, but it absolutely is very confusing. So the first time
I've actually never heard of this term before, but that's probably because I'm not as deep as you are in this space, and my listeners may or may not be either. Maybe you want to just quickly tell what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. So confusion matrix essentially.
So we'll take a short break. I'll catch you up in case you're just tuning in, or maybe you're skipping around. I know this is it's a long episode. It's about 30 minutes long. So again, this is an episode that I recorded on Zencastr. So Zencastr is a online service. There is a free tier to it that I personally use. I don't pay for it. You could definitely support them. It's a good service. So I record it with my guest. My audio records on my computer, and their audio records on their computer. The service automatically does that, and it automatically uploads it when the interview is over. So that's why I have 2 tracks here. So basically what I've done is I've imported them into GarageBand, which is a free tool on Mac. And I am stripping away the silences. I am kind of fixing any kind of overlap. So maybe I talk over Upkar, or maybe Upkar talks over me, or maybe there's some kind of audio sync issue in general. This is the type of stuff that I'm working to correct. So using very basic commands here in GarageBand, but I'm by no means an expert when it comes to audio. So basically all I'm doing is using I think it's a slice command, and that's with Command T on the keyboard. It just slices at the playhead value. or the tracker, whatever you want to call this bar. And then I can delete or move around as necessary. So that's kind of where we stand. I think we're somewhere over here as far as completeness. So we're almost done. When I'm done, I'm going to add an outro, and I'll show you how to export it. And that kind of sums up what it takes to edit podcasts. So this is what I do for each of the Polyglot Developer Podcasts. So if you're new to this podcast, it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, pretty much every major podcast network. I've been doing this for a few years now. I release about one episode per month, so not a whole lot, because you know what, it takes me a while to edit these things. I got to edit them, I got to record them. So if this is a 30-minute episode, it took me 30 minutes to record it, at least 30 minutes to edit it, and then however long it takes me to find an actual guest for the episode. So it's not a short process. Shouldn't stop you from wanting to start your own podcast, but just note that there's work involved. You can always hire it out, but I'm just a one person army here when it comes to most of the stuff for the Polyglot Developer. So there's only so much I can do, and I don't have the financial resources to get staff to do this for me. So let's go ahead and continue, and we'll wrap this up.
It's a way to see performance on your model based on multiple categories, I guess. So essentially what it looks like is it's a table or a matrix. And on the left-hand side, you have your predicted class. And on the top, you have your actual class. So the columns are the actual classes. And this is generally used for classification algorithms, or models, I should say that, in supervised learning. And so you have your predicted classes on the left, your actual on the top. And so based on that, you want to see how many times your model gave you a true positive, which means, the category was what our model, the actual and predicted were both the same. More importantly, you may also want to look at false positive or true negative. Right. So, false positive or false negative, and you can probably tell it's very confusing. So maybe that's where the name comes from.
Yeah. All right.
But based on this table, then you have some sort of evaluation criteria that you can come up with, right? So you can take a ratio of these things, or you can, in certain situations you may want less false positive. It may be, and in other situations you're okay with getting more false positives, right? So, for example, if your model is predicting, if somebody has cancer or not, in that case, you don't want to miss out on some data points, right? So even if somebody doesn't have a serious medical condition, it's okay to have false positive where you still have them go in and test. It would be more harmful to have a false negative where you miss out on a situation like that, right? So again, based on...
Let me just fix my chat right now. I don't know what's going on with Discord, but it doesn't let me attach it to my second monitor here. So it's doing some weird stuff. As you see that I couldn't get it off the screen because I couldn't click the X button. But let's proceed.
On your
actually, if you're sitting in the chat, if you're watching this stream, watching me edit this podcast, if you're not already following this channel, please hit that follow button. You'll get updates when it comes to when I go live, and it helps me kind of get closer to affiliate status, where I get different perks when it comes to Twitch. So the more followers, the more people watching, the better off.
What you're trying to do based on the model, you can look at these different evaluation metrics, and confusion matrix is just one way of describing the performance of your model in a tabular or a matrix fashion.
Got it. So going back into our kind of pipeline of events, so we left off with the model. Is there anything else as far as our stages go?
Absolutely. So now that you have developed your model, it's sitting on my laptop, or maybe it's sitting in the cloud in a Jupyter notebook or a Python file. That's all, or maybe it's serialized to file or to disk. That's all great. But now there are people or teams wanting to use my model. So the next step would be to deploy this model somewhere that other people can reach. And that, it's also part of a machine learning engineer's day-to-day role, would be to ensure that that you're able to scale up the model to the teams that need access to it. There's also version control. So just like software, you come up with these different models. You need to be able to track what data was used to create some model, to provide some transparency to the whole process, but also then be able to move from one model version to the next model version, a better model version, and then maybe be able to roll back. So there's whole version control aspect to it. And then even after you deploy it, so model deployment, model management, and I would say the next step would be continuous evaluation of this model. So a lot of times people think, here, I've created this model, and put it on the shelf for people to use. But mostly what happens is data changes, our world changes, our environment changes, our clients change, and which means that we need to be able to constantly test this model with new data that's coming in, and monitor the performance of this model, right? So there's that's the whole feedback loop where you may see the performance of the model going down. Perhaps it's because the data has changed in a way that it's so different from the training data that the model was trained on that model doesn't know what to do with this new unseen data. So in that case, you may want to retrain it with the new data and then redeploy it. So there's that whole cycle as well.
Wow, that's intense. Is it as long and tiresome as maybe we just explained, or is it actually quite simple going real into it as a developer?
So when you're going into it as, first of all, when you think of data science projects and data science teams, usually it's made up of a number of different roles. Data scientists being one of those many roles. You also have a data engineer. So data engineer, their job may be in the first phase of this pipeline where they are gathering all of this data. They're making sure it's in the correct format, and reducing noise and stuff like that. Then you have the data scientist who's working with the models. They do have some programming skills because a lot of these frameworks are maybe written in Python or R. And then you have machine learning engineers who are then ensuring that platform is able to store and host multiple models, ensures there's capacity to serve end users, etc. And then finally, this is a new role, which is very exciting. Maybe not so new, but it's called data journalist. And the data journalist's job is then to work with the domain, the client or the expert, and then create perhaps like dashboards and KPIs that present the findings of your model, right? So there are different roles. So I would say if you're starting out, I know the whole process or the life cycle of a data science project, it seems like there are a lot of steps, and there are. But as a data scientist, it's, I'll mention Kaggle again. If you go to Kaggle, or we have at IBM, we have a couple of resources. There is a resource called Data Asset Exchange. We have curated data sets that you can go and play with. And it's really easy to take one of these data sets and open a Jupyter notebook and use something like Pandas, perhaps, which is a data exploration library, and start playing with this data. And then, once you start getting interested in it, then maybe you move on to something like scikit-learn, which makes it really easy to apply one of these models. And that's okay, right? It's your little world where you're playing with some data, you have some findings. Maybe you put it up on Medium, maybe you put it up on GitHub as a Python notebook, and share it with your friends. And that's a great way to get started without getting into the whole model deployment and management and performance.
So now I kind of want to shift gears then. So we walk through the kind of the life cycle. Where does IBM fit into this? Because I know there's IBM Watson, which in my mind, because I'm kind of old, I guess, Watson is kind of the first ever time I was exposed to something kind of AI, machine learning. I'm sure it's probably evolved way beyond that. But where does IBM currently fit for a machine learning kind of area of expertise?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have some great research going on in this area, obviously. But from a consumer point of view or developer point of view, IBM fits into all of these different steps in this life cycle, data science life cycle, right? So in terms of data acquisition, there are various kinds of ETL tools that will help you gather this data, clean this data, transform this data, Watson by itself, it's kind of hard to talk about Watson as one thing. There are multiple services. I think of Watson as a umbrella brand with multiple machine learning and AI services sitting inside of Watson. And so another way to think of it is, depending on your expertise, there are different levels to get into the services provided by Watson or consume them. So for example, if I'm a software developer or if I'm an iOS developer and I want to do some natural language processing, or perhaps I want to do language translation in my application. And so without having to build this model by myself, I actually don't want to do that. And I don't want to hire somebody to build something from scratch. There are what I call black box APIs or services under Watson that will do language translation for you. All you need is an account, you pass it and an endpoint, and you send it your data with the correct authentication and security, and it comes back with the translated data. So that's like the sort of bottom tier to get into some of the services provided by Watson. The second tier, I call them the more user assisted or guided machine learning applications. So we have something called Auto AI, which is amazing. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to make a lot of these intelligent decisions for you, especially in the model development phase that we talked about. So you have your data, and essentially you take your Excel file, throw it at Auto AI, and say, hey, Auto AI, I want to do a classification problem. Here are some constraints. Here are the metrics I'm looking at. Go do your thing. And the whole manual process or tedious process of then trying out a dozen different models and figuring out what the best model is, you let Auto AI do that for you. So that for me, that's sort of the second tier to get in, where I want to have some control, but I'm okay having Watson take a lot of these decisions for me and come up with a model. And then finally, if I want to do everything from scratch, then IBM has a service called Watson Machine Learning, which lets me deploy open source machine learning frameworks. So that could be something like scikit-learn, or that could be PyTorch or TensorFlow. I can have my own model. I create it locally or create it on the cloud, it doesn't matter. And then for the deployment purposes, I can hand it over to Watson and say, hey, can you please deploy and manage this for me, even though I've created this a custom model on my own. So there's, depending on where you want to get in, there are different tiers and a lot of different services provided on IBM Cloud under the Watson umbrella.
That's great. So, Upkar, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience of this podcast? Something maybe you wish you knew when you were starting out? Maybe you want to plug something that you're working on. Totally up to you. Take it wherever you want.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I was curious about, and I'm getting a lot more into now, I've given a couple of talks on it, and we have done a couple of meetups, is fairness in models and fairness in machine learning and artificial intelligence. So, the typical example, there's a couple of examples. The one most recently that I'm sure some of the audience have probably ran into on Twitter is DHH, the creator of Ruby on Rails. Hopefully I didn't get that wrong. Had a tweet where he said he was complaining about Apple Card and how his wife got a lot less credit limit, even though everything is joined and essentially they have the same financial background. And so that was a case where it picked up a lot of steam, and I'm not saying that at the face of it, it looks like bias, but maybe it is, maybe it is not. It definitely started up a conversation, which is the whole idea. And so bias is essentially discrimination of a person or a group of people, but more importantly, it's systematic discrimination over time. And that can happen in your data, that can happen in your models. And so I would very, very strongly encourage folks that are getting into machine learning and data science. It is not sort of the cool part of data science, but it is a very, very important part that's affecting lives every single day. And so if you get a chance, or I would like it to be a mandatory course, or a chapter in the data science book to be aware of the different kinds of biases, how we introduce them, and more importantly, It's hard to completely get rid of them, but how do you mitigate, how do you work around biases in our models in data science? And
Awesome.
so just to end that, there is an open source toolkit called AI Fairness 360. IBM is a contributor, but it is completely community driven, and it has, last I checked, over 70 different metrics, which is amazing, of what bias could mean in artificial intelligence and machine learning models. So I'm going to plug that in.
Awesome. No, that's great. Upkar, this was a great episode. I feel like I learned a lot because I had very little experience prior, so I'm hoping that the listeners get the same result that I got out of it. So a major thanks for coming on this show.
Absolutely. Thank you. Like I said, this is my first podcast ever. You made me feel very welcome. So thank you so much.
All right. So it looks like this is the end of the episode. You can see that there's minor sync issues here. Just going to cut it at the end here. So that was kind of the meat of the episode. I already recorded an intro. Now it kind of makes sense to do an outro, just to show, hey, the episode's done and not just do a hard stop. So this is where I usually plug links. I usually make requests, like call to actions, you can say. None of them are really paid. They're all free stuff. But you can decide to do your podcast however you want when it comes to intros and outros. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure you click back on that first track, because that's where I did the previous narration, which was the intro. I'm going to keep it on the same track for the outro, and not either of the two tracks that I recorded with Zencastr. So let's give it a shot. I hope you found whoops. Sometimes I have a rough start, so it may take me a few times to get this right, or something that I actually like. I hope you found it happens. Sometimes you get stage fright. Sometimes you get, at least for me, sometimes I don't always have clarity of thought. I hope you found the material that Upkar gave valuable when it comes to learning about machine learning. So you notice that I do this in short chunks again, because if I make a mistake, I don't want to have to go and edit the whole thing again. So I did a chunk, thanking, kind of reiterating on the guest. So let's see how it transitions in.
So thank you so much.
I hope you found the material that Upkar gave valuable when it comes to learning about machine learning. All right, so the next up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a request for people to give a review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts. So if you enjoyed this podcast episode, it would mean a lot to me if you went into Apple Podcasts or Spotify or some other network that allows for ratings and reviews, and lifted a 5-star rating and then said something nice about the episode itself. So that way future listeners, when they stumble upon this podcast, they can get an idea of what they're getting themselves into and whether or not they should sit down and listen to each of these 30 or so minute episodes. So I just recorded that chunk. Let's check it out. Learning about machine learning. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, it would mean a lot to me if you went into Apple Podcasts or Spotify or some other network that allows for ratings and reviews, and lifted a 5-star rating and then said something nice about the episode itself. So that way future listeners, when they stumble upon this podcast, they can get an idea of what they're getting themselves into and whether or not they should sit down and listen to each of these 30 or so minute episodes. Perfect. All right, next up, I'll just reiterate following the website. So if you want more great material, like the content on this particular podcast episode, head over to the Polyglot Developer website. I previously mentioned it at the beginning of this podcast episode, but you can find this website at thepolyglotdeveloper.com. So let's check it out. It's 30 or so minute episodes. If you want more great material, like the content on this particular podcast episode, head over to the Polyglot Developer website. I previously mentioned it at the beginning of this podcast episode, but you can find this website at thepolyglotdeveloper.com. All right. And I believe this is episode number 36. So I'm just going to say, and that kind of concludes the episode. So let's check it out. And that concludes episode number 36. Developer.com. And that concludes episode number 36. All right, so I have an outro. Let's just rewind a bit, kind of see the flow of it. We're certainly not gonna listen to the whole episode, but let's listen to the outro and how it transitions in to give us a refresher. This is episode number 36 of the Polyglot Developer Podcast, and I'm your host, Nick Raboy. Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. In this episode, I'm with Upkar Litter from IBM, and we're going to be talking about machine learning and how to do it when it comes to development, data science, AI, just various relevant topics when it comes to the job market nowadays. If you're looking for content related to this particular episode, head over to the Polyglot Developer blog. So if you go to thepolyglotdeveloper.com, you can read up on a lot of great tutorials. You can get links to YouTube videos that I've recorded, other podcast episodes, just all around good stuff when it comes to learning about different technologies. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, I'm with Upkar Litter from IBM, and we're going to be talking about machine learning in this particular podcast episode. But before we get into the bulk of the episode, I want to give Upkar a chance to introduce himself. So how you doing, Upkar?
Hi, Nick. I'm very happy to be here today.
All right, perfect. I think I'm satisfied with that so far. So what I can do is we can export it. So I'm going to click, you actually don't see it in the stream, I don't think, but there's in the menu bar for GarageBand, you can click share and then say export song to disk. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to save it to, let's say, maybe the desktop. I'll just leave it however it was. Because I upload it to iTunes, or I think it's Apple Podcasts now, in order to keep kind of compatibility between podcast networks, I'm going to make it an MP3. I'm also going to lower the quality of it. That's totally up to you on what kind of quality you want. I always choose 128. I know it says medium quality, but I don't know. Maybe I'm old and my ears don't work as well as they used to, but 128 sounds pretty good to me. It's up to you. The lower the bit rate here, the smaller the file size. So just note that if you're paying for your own hosting on these, or if you're on a network that calculates bandwidth, you're charged based on bandwidth, the larger the file size, the more it's going to cost you. But if you're on a network that doesn't care and you kind of get unlimited listens or unlimited file sizes, go all out. Use the maximum quality. But for me, because I'm using S3, and S3 charges based on file size storage as well as the transfer, which is the bandwidth, I try to keep it minimal so that way my bill is low. So I'll export it, and I'll just talk to you again through what we did. It just takes a minute to export. So again, Zencastr. That's what I use for recording these episodes. I used to use Skype. I used to use, I think it was called Ecamm, which was a good product, but it couldn't keep up with all of the updates that Skype was having. So I switched out. Zencastr has a free plan, a paid plan. I'm on the free plan. I'm not getting any kind of affiliate credit. But basically, it's what I think it is. I think it's WebRTC. So you're able to hop on it with your guests, and you don't need to install any software to get it working. It works right in your web browser. When you hit that record button, it records the tracks on each person's computer. So it records it locally on their computer. It also has the kind of voice over IP, so that way you can actually hear the conversation. But the local track is going to be high quality. Even if the voice over IP connection is low quality, the local copy is a lot higher quality, and that gets uploaded at the end of the end of the call. I dropped it into GarageBand. Your GarageBand might look a little different than mine. It depends on what version you're using. I think I'm using an older version. I'm not sure. It's similar enough. All we did was we changed the settings, the equalizer settings a little bit for the microphone. I just increased the low and decreased the high. I saw that on a YouTube video once. They said that it's good when it comes to normalizing the audio. I'm not an audio expert. There's probably better ways to kind of add clarity to your audio. I'm using an AT2020 microphone, so this is a higher quality microphone, which does make a huge difference. This one right here is the USB version. It's like $150 on Amazon. I recommend it, but there's other good ones out there as well. When we added the tracks, because the audio that I was narrating was much higher than the audio on the tracks, I actually lowered a little bit. So that way I wanted to get all three of the tracks kind of like equalized on or normalized on the volume level. So that way you're not in your car and then you get freaked out because one of the guests is speaking really loud and one's speaking really soft. So just minor enhancements. Exported the track. It exported fine. So let's go ahead. Maybe we won't play it. It's something we've already heard. It's just an exported MP3 file that you can upload to wherever you want to host your podcast. Sorry if I blinded you. I know that we were on a darker screen. Just want to reiterate that we were using Zencastr. I'll add this to the chat. We're also using GarageBand. If you want to learn more, go to my website. Go to the polyglotdeveloper.com website. This upload, this video, this live stream, it will be on demand on YouTube. So if you missed it or you want to skip around to certain parts, because I know it was long, it was dry. I personally probably wouldn't want to watch somebody else edit a podcast, but this is what I go through when I edit podcasts. So you're free to skip around, see what I was doing, kind of get ideas for yourself. I have another similar video that I did for video editing for YouTube. The long-term plan, though, is to keep this a development channel. So I've already had a development video with Corbin Crutchley. The plan is to have more of those. It's just that I do get a lot of questions when it comes to video and podcast editing. A lot of people are interested in doing the same thing that I'm doing. So this should answer a lot of questions. If you're viewing this, though, on YouTube, it would mean a lot to me if you did follow the channel on Twitch as well. It would also mean a lot to me if you gave it a thumbs up, maybe said something nice about the recording. I know that I get a lot of troll comments. Please, if you want to be a troll somewhere else. It's not very nice. I'm new to streaming. Things are subject to change. I know that this window, it could be small. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to figure out everything. I'm trying to figure out the audio settings, the video settings. It's going to take some time. If you look back at some of my earlier YouTube videos, they're not very good compared to the newer videos that I have. It takes time to learn how to do it correctly. So it's not going to be an overnight thing. Just give me some time, give me some feedback. Try to be nice about it. If you think that I could improve on something and you know how to improve upon it, let me know what I should do. So that way I could implement it. So again, thank you for tuning in. Much appreciated. This is the Polyglot Developer on Twitch.